Hi, I'm PJ Garcia from Beach Pacific Escrow in Huntington Beach.
And I'm Genia Engelstad from Elite Escrow Services in San Diego. And this is
Escrow Talk.
Oh, I love that name. It's so exciting. I love it, especially when we say it together.
I know, it's kind of fun and corny.
Yeah.
Gina and I talk so much about escrow, and we call each other and bounce ideas off of each other and get advice, and what do you think about this, and here's a problem of the day. So we thought it might be beneficial to share some of that information with others. Hopefully you'll think so too.
Well, and not to mention the fact we are getting older and wiser, but unfortunately I forget the wise things that I said 10 minutes ago, so it's good that this will be recorded.
Agreed. But first we want to do some housekeeping. Everything stated in this presentation is just a conversation between Gina and I, an exchange of ideas and thoughts, really. And it's not intended to be official interpretation of our companies or representation of our companies, I should say, or our trade associations, Escrow Institute of California or California Escrow Association. You should always talk with management and your legal or financial counsel before implementing policies and procedures.
And as we are not management, legal, or financial experts, that's really important to remember that you shouldn't take what we say as,
you should really take it with a big grain of salt.
Totally. And we also want to add that your mileage will vary. Price does not include tax. Assembly is required. Batteries are definitely not included. And I think we owe Mickey from WFG Title. She did that at one of your meetings. I
it was very clever.
Exactly. And I think PJ would normally say that we want to keep all this escrow information in a cool, dry place, right?
Dark place.
And dry.
And don't expose it to sunlight.
Exactly. Okay.
Results may vary.
Oh, we crack ourselves up. Okay, so today, actually, PJ, yesterday we had a phone call and you called me. And what's funny is when PJ calls me on the phone, I do this to you a lot, or like you'll call me and I do this to you a lot. I don't even say, hey, PJ, because my phone says that's you. And I'll say, you cannot believe what happened today. Ugh. And I give her like 10 minutes of what happened today. And I'm like, okay, why did you call? And she's like,
can't remember.
Or I do the thing let me call you right back, right before I even know. Yeah. And you're like, how do I even know who I am? But anyway, so yesterday we were talking and we got to talking about DocuSign. U with like a letter U, sign. And we thought it might be valuable to talk about today. So, PJ, tell us.
What is DocuSign?
Exactly.
Well, DocuSign is a form of electronic signature, and you may or may not be familiar with state and federal law known as UETA and e-sign. Those are laws that were enacted back in the late 90s that basically were set up to enable electronic commerce. And
when you're talking about electronic commerce, in that instance, it would be like going to the grocery store and signing that little pad, like that?
That would be part of it,
okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So it sets up the criteria that people have to, in a contract, and that's a form of a contract, by the way.
Yes.
You're signing or agreeing to pay your credit card company. Well, when people enter into a real estate contract, it's become more and more prevalent that they do so mostly using the platform called DocuSign.
Which is actually a company.
It's a company.
And when we say DocuSign, kind of in our industry, we're kind of like Kleenex.
It's like, I was just going to say it's like Kleenex.
Or a Xerox machine.
Right.
We're kind of using that as just a word for all of our electronic things.
Because it's basically a platform that a company has set up using an internet portal where you can share and sign documents for various purposes, but in our case it's for real estate and escrow transactions.
Okay, so for us, California escrow settlement agents, we know DocuSign is basically when we get the purchase agreement and people sign with like a canned signature
Right. You create. You can do it various ways. You can use your finger or a stylus and
Right.
sign your name, or you can just create. Say, I want to choose this font and type your name, and that will then thereafter be your signature on that platform. You'll do signature and you'll do initials, and that represents when you click the box that says place my signature here. That represents your intent to sign that document.
Okay, so we see it. That's how we see it. We see it when it comes across, when people open an escrow. We'll see it on the purchase agreement. We'll see it on maybe addendums.
And the software does assign some numeric and some computer code to that signature, so it can, in theory, be authenticated.
Okay, so there's federal rules about this, which we just talked about. We talked about DocuSign being a company that we use a lot. I mean, it's not the only electronic signature platform, but it's one that we use a lot,
it's the one we see currently today, see the most.
So our particular companies are regulated by the Department of Business Oversight. We are licensed independent escrow companies, right? And what does the DBO, the Department of Business Oversight, think about electronic signatures?
Well, I don't think they're real warm and fuzzy about them. However, it is state and federal law, and
you can't ignore it.
They acknowledge and understand that they have to allow it because it's state and federal law. What they have indicated to the industry is that they would expect to see, because in order to enter into and do electronic commerce, including contracts, both parties have to agree that transaction will be conducted that way in whole or in part. Doesn't mean if you DocuSign one thing you can't ink sign another. Just means that both parties agree that at some level, at some time, in some form, that is going to be used to execute or deliver documents.
And when you go onto DocuSign, if anybody's ever done it, if you go into DocuSign, before you can make that first signature, you have to agree that whatever...
There's a sort of specific notice, and I've looked at DocuSigns. I actually... because I was on the Escrow Law Advisory Committee when this came up before the then Department of Corporations, and they looked at it and they said, yes, we acknowledge that it can be used, but you need to have this authorization and agreement in your file. So I went and created one, using the research that I did. I've looked at DocuSigns and they're very similar. So I think that made me feel good that I'd covered what I needed.
Well, and I would like to say, PJ, that you shared that with me, as you are so generous in sharing it with a lot of your escrow friends. And I happened to have an attorney look at it too, because we were talking about something and I said, have you ever seen it? And he thought that you covered every issue in that, and you dotted all your I's and crossed your T's. And I don't know if I ever told you that before, but that was very impressive.
You didn't. Thank you.
Anyway.
Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
So, all right. Now, so we're not going to talk today about, obviously, me logging on, pretending I'm you and creating a signature for a document, because we are all honest consumers and business owners in California.
And that's a different conversation, and it applies to other things besides DocuSign. That's one we should have very, very soon.
Exactly. But what we want to go on here is say, okay, so now we have the agreement to accept the DocuSign. The contract is DocuSigned, right?
Well, at least in part.
We think, right? Our escrow instructions, it says in our escrow instructions that we're going to accept that. Now, what I hear in my world is agents come to us and say, well, I want you to send the escrow instructions to the people so they can DocuSign their escrow instructions.
Which is a whole different process.
Other thing, because I assume that when they wrote the DocuSign program that, the contracts are kind of static, right? So you always have an initial at the bottom of page 1. Page 1 never carries over to page 2 because it's, like 5 items on page 1.
Yeah, there's standard language.
Exactly.
The variables are all checkbox fields and not things that are going to affect typically that are going to affect signatures.
And you and I know that, as escrow people, we're kind of wordy. And so what happens is page 1 sometimes ends up on page 3 as well.
Well, it depends on what you need to address.
Exactly.
And of course, our regulator would like to see everything under the sun on page 1, but it really only is a certain length and size. So it's often, it depends on how long your things like your legal description are. What we usually hit right up front is those things our regulator requires, and the contract terms, and as much as we can get in there about who the people are, the buyers, vesting, and the legal description and property address, but that's not static.
And we have things, there's many things that we have in our instructions that have to be completed.
Yes.
And we have like the statement of information form, for example, that may have 40 lines on it of things that have to be completed by a buyer or seller, or the FERPTA form, or
and
the 593 form, or...
The way DocuSign works is it's fairly easy to place signatures. It can be a little bit time consuming to go through for instance, our 9-10 pages of escrow instructions and place all the initials and signatures where they need to be. The bigger challenge is the forms.
Yes.
We have some of the forms Gina just listed, and those are a challenge because you've got variables within the form. You have and trust me, I've created templates and I've been working with them for a couple of years now on DocuSign, and I never know how it's going to come back to me. Sometimes the text will be itty bitty tiny,
or it'll be on the words, it'll be
over the top of the words, or so it's somewhat, because these are electronic documents, so if they're not static, they can have variables interposed as they go through the system.
Well, and one of my girls in my office said, well, Gina, DocuSign is not docu-complete, which I think really kind of sums it all up, and that's our challenge.
Exactly.
So what we have done in our office is we've called DocuSign and, said, work through this problem, and they have agreed, and I had a good conversation with them yesterday where they acknowledge this is an issue. They don't want to create forms, but they will, they have talked to me about possibly helping us and our industry trying to make some maybe standardized forms that we won't have this problem. And I know that your very own husband, Pat Garcia, has been elected, challenged, forcibly volunteered to talk to DocuSign about some of the issues that face our profession. And so hopefully...
Including the pricing. Because it is quite pricey and it's a per user. So in an office the size of yours, Gina, how many employees you have? You're up to...
Yeah, it's a lot of money because it's like $360 a person, at this point a year. And that's a lot of money. And who's going to... If people want to have that convenience, then sometimes we have to pay for that, and that kind of is a bad thing. I mean, it's a good and a bad thing, but it's something that...
Well, in the context of, we talked about in another post we did about, it seems like sellers and buyers open escrow and leave town these days. It's sort of the running joke about, okay, when are you leaving town? And because people are for their jobs, they're traveling more, for whatever, they're traveling more. So DocuSign is a real, and other types of electronic signatures are a really, really good tool, but they have to be managed well and they have to be utilized properly. In fact, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I think one of Mr. Cordery's pet projects is to get the closing process to an electronic closing. And that's a tall order. It can be done, but it's a tall order. And you want to try and do it in a way, because you're also always, in our business, we're also always trying to authenticate that we have the signatures that we think we have, and that there's not any shenanigans or fraud. And that is not easy. It really isn't.
And it's not easy, especially when anybody, if you give them your password, can go on and put your signature on anything. There's a big difference, I think, and I've said this before, going on and signing for an app that you're going to get an app on your phone for $5, or if you're clicking to borrow $100,000 or $600,000.
But the process is the same.
It's kind of the same, but it's a little.
But there's a bigger financial.
Don't people need to take time and? This is a big thing we're doing, borrowing money or buying real estate, or...
I would love to see people take a little more time than they do. They really tend to kind of treat it all as pro forma.
Yes.
And including frankly, the initial purchase agreement. And there's a lot of legalese in there. There's a lot of technical things. It's a lot of documentation to read, both our escrow instructions and the purchase agreement. And I understand that the urge to move through it quickly, but there are terms in there that matter.
And I think that, we have a couple of millennials in our office, that are working on this for us, and we probably should talk about millennials sometime in the future.
Yes.
But that are working on this, that understand this process, and understand, and this is how they communicate. We're texting, we're Twittering, we're Imagegramming, Instagramming, whatever we're doing. So anyway, this will be something we'll talk about coming forward. I know that Pat Garcia is going to also be talking on behalf of the Escrow Institute to DocuSign. So hopefully we'll have some answers for our members and non-members alike to maybe help this process go forward, and to know that this is something that's coming, that's not going to go away. It's here.
It is. And it really does facilitate commerce.
But we also have to say, PJ, that there's some things that still have to be live signed, like a grantee.
Anything that needs to be notarized and recorded. No county recorder in the state of California currently will accept an electronically signed document for recording. There are states that have actually, you can now be notarized anywhere from a Virginia notary by teleconference. And some of those states also have electronic notarizations and signatures that their counties will accept. California is big and we're pretty progressive, but on the right things, I think we tend to move slowly, and I believe this is one of them. We'll have a conversation about that. But I lost my train of thought.
I think that's it. Hopefully we'll be hearing some good news about this in the coming weeks. We'll talk about DocuSign some more.
I remembered.
What does it go?
I remembered. I wanted to say that this is a great way to facilitate
I interrupted
commerce.
Commerce. Yes.
And so what we have to recognize is we have the gamut of people that are World War II generation, clear down through the millennials, who all have a very different comfort level with the technology. And by the way, that isn't totally age related. I've got some older people that are, please send it to me DocuSign. I'd rather do that.
Exactly.
So, but we have to be sensitive to that. So we have to figure out a way to make the technology work best for us and for our clients individually, and know and gauge what that is. And so that's what I wanted to say. Now, where were you going?
I think I was done.
You were done?
I think I was done with the conversation.
Are we ever done?
I think on this particular thing, this is Escrow Talk once again. Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you next time.